and welcome to the webinar on Turbulent Times May Require Rethinking Your Monitoring Focus. This webinar is hosted by Commentelli, which provides competitive and market intelligence solutions to the customers worldwide to help them turn data into insights so they can make better business decisions.
Thank you, Malika. So, hello everybody. I'm very pleased to have you with us. Today is actually the very first day that I have the honor from the Commentelli side to become the leader and ambassador of this Commentelli Ambassadors Network. Commentelli Competitive Intelligence Ambassadors Network is a forum where leading market intelligence, competitive intelligence professionals are sharing insights peer-to-peer way, what works, what doesn't, and what to keep in mind. And today we have the great honor to have from Finland, Petteri Verronen, to speak about turbulent times and his past multi-decade experience with these challenges, so that you wouldn't have to do the same mistakes that some other companies have done. Petteri, over to you. Would you like to say a few words about why you are the leading expert to speak about these matters?
Absolutely, kind words. Thank you. Thank you, Kari, and pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Happy to have the chat today. So, like I said, my name is Petteri Verronen. I work as a private consultant, MICI advisor role, been involved in the market competitive intelligence since year 2000 and working a lot with globally operating companies. And by background, I'm a process consultant, so that's how I started in the industry, and that's how I kind of ended my academic research as well back in the day, a couple of decades ago. And my heart is still warped towards the process development, and I guess that's why we are still talking about it today. I've been involved in many kind of angles within the market intelligence community, and lately specializing in tools. But I like to look at the whole picture and try to understand how information is a process and how it should be utilized in decision making to make it actionable and actually benefit the organizations that are using it. And in addition to this role, I'm also having a daytime job in a foresight company called Futures Platform here in Helsinki, Finland, and it kind of nicely brings together the long-term planning and trying to identify the futures ahead of us in 20, 30, 40 years ahead of us, and then complements my background and love towards the MICI and a little bit shorter term planning for companies.
So, dear audience, we have here a person who has studied these matters in academia, and after that worked over 20 years with these matters, with specific focus on the process side. And as the devil is in the detail, when the high-level strategies and missions and visions comes to execution, process mastery is the key. And that's where things can go seriously wrong. Recently in social media, there has been some discussion about how the foresight function and market and competitive intelligence function work together. And there, Petteri, you have a good position as you work both in foresight as well as in the market and competitive intelligence. If the foresight is looking to the longer time future scenarios, a market and competitive intelligence tends to be more actionable and more near future oriented. And here we have one question here on the slide that I would like to discuss. But before jumping into this question, you had some example about this situation where things happen a little bit faster than far away in the future, that there was some recent big manufacturing company in Europe facing immediate trouble. Could you give us a little bit more insight about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk about that. So it's a kind of I wouldn't call it necessarily a hobby, but you kind of after working with this stuff, you kind of develop this knack of looking through news and things in a certain way. And I think one good example in a bad situation about the recent change that actually it deals with both the foresight, the long-term planning, as well as the short-term planning, because I know that the company in question actually is doing lots of foresight and scenario planning and things like that. But there was this one unnamed large car manufacturer in Europe, and large in terms of the global scale as well. And it was just kind of striking to me when I was reading the news right when Russia had invaded Ukraine. It was the next day after that when the CEO of this company published a statement that they've created a task force to assess the possible consequences of the Ukraine, well, they call it crisis, I call it war, on the company. And it was puzzling to me, because I know that they do the long-term planning. They must do a lot of really tactical level intelligence as well. And now we were talking about the situation where the company is having a global supplier network of more than 40,000 suppliers, individual suppliers. And there was also part of the electrical cable harnesses were produced in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine. And this particular time was personally interesting to me as well, and that's why I was following the car company, because I was involved in the process as a private citizen with regards to the probably most waited for car models ever, few electric vehicles that they were producing, and they were producing some of the key components in Ukraine. And as a consequence of the Ukraine situation, they had to temporarily halt production of these models, and they are still suffering and facing continuous challenges today. And of course, that was after the COVID was already posing issues to them. And it just made me wonder, could this have been avoided somehow? If you are having critical suppliers in areas that are really risky in terms of the kind of the foresight that they are doing, and they must have identified things latest in 2014, after the Ukraine escalation was kind of bringing more attention globally. So that kind of things you find every now and then.
Exactly, that's a perfect example where the foresight and market and competitive intelligence things go in hand. Whereas that particular situation was very clear that something must happen immediately after, well, maybe we should say before, but after the 24th of February last year, 2022 invasion. In fact, like you say, the Crimea invasion happened already 2014. So from 2014 to 2022, it was 8 years. We could say potentially it could have been anticipated a little bit in advance. So let's say 10 years. That 10 years landscape is more for the foresight, whereas the market and competitive intelligence is maybe the gap of immediate happenings as well as maybe plus minus 5 years. So nevertheless, they should have known this already, the potential increased risk from 2014. And now what was the most striking, what you said, is that after the crisis already happened, that's when they started to think that should we do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. It makes me wonder if they have been kind of falling into one of the pitfalls that I have met on several occasions within my clients in this area. It's easy to focus on the immediate competition. They must know everything all the other companies are doing with regards to the electric vehicles, and they analyze customer behavior, and they must already also be following up what's happening in the supplier network, but apparently it was somehow blindsided by them that this type of things may be happening. And it's even more striking because supplier network was critical during the COVID, because all of the companies were suffering, and then they kind of let themselves to be falling in the next pitfall again.
And there we go. And that relates to the question here. So when the COVID time came, there was lots of crises. And if you please, Mike, take the slide back. And when the COVID time came, there was lots of cost cutting happening in companies. They were putting the budgets on hold and freeze and so on. And that also related to market and competitive intelligence domain, that people were not maybe able to execute properly their plans. And there was lots of restructuring happening in companies. So if we think about that situation of stagnation or cutting because the crisis leads to cost cutting, what is your experience from the past, Petteri? How can the market and competitive intelligence professionals protect their domain in this kind of crisis situations?
Yep, I guess the boring thing is that you should be prepared beforehand. So kind of preparation is the best protection. Be in the know, be the critical resource for the decision makers. So they really can't afford to drop you, at least cut that much, because when the times get difficult, there will be, generally speaking, there will be cuts, and there are certain discontinuity of services, and you may lose key persons, and it's always really difficult to replace anything when the costs are being carefully monitored. So the preparation is the best medicine, I think, generally speaking. And it's really important to know your resources, so kind of assess what you have, what is your focus, what are the, where you spend your money, what are the information resources, what kind of tools you have, and what kind of things there are that you can live without if there's need to streamline, so that you don't jeopardize the whole program. And I guess if that's an answering to the kind of to the question at all, I think one of the key things that is probably very difficult is that don't hide. So if you are not there quite yet, the time of the crisis is the kind of the last opportunity to attack and be proactive and come up with suggestions and insights and opportunities for the management. Because I haven't seen one single passive market intelligence competitive operation flourish and thrive, not in good times nor in bad times. So it's really important to be right there in the center of decision making. And I know it sounds lame, but the process is kind of the key answer in that you need to understand how information is used and what are the kind of the special characteristics of that company and how the decision making is working, and how can you tap into strategy process, and how you can tap into sales, and how you can tap into marketing, and so on.
Exactly. Now you hit the nail. So many people feel maybe that they don't have the power, that they are not listened, and it's not maybe paid attention to or respect their domain, and that's why it's easy to cut from. But if, like you say, it's tapped into other processes and it's of high relevance, then it's more likelihood that you will be actually, instead of being the one to be shot down, one who is assisting to create the new direction of the company. And that maybe leads us to the next slide. Malika, could you please take us forward? So here we are discussing again the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine war. And actually, this is also now very fresh. Today is Tuesday, and the 14th of March 2023. And what happened just last week, Friday, the 10th of March 2023, there was a mass panic from the Silicon Valley Bank. And then later, the US government has taken over that bank in practice. And there has been this banking crisis happening in USA, and what it has happened related to is that there was over 1,000 startups that had all their money in that bank. If the bank goes down, the startups cannot pay salaries for the employees. It has very practical consequences. Now there has been some package to save the situation, but I think this is what you were referring to, Petteri, that when there comes this kind of massive disruption, it can overnight change the business and just freeze it. So if you would be the market and competitive intelligence professional in some of these companies that is suddenly losing 30%, 40%, or 100% of their assets, what would you do? What can your peers, our audience, do to help?
That's a very good question. I would be a rich man if I was able to answer that in a way that I can sell that as a solution to everybody. But to kind of the original question, looking at that, I think speaking about my own personal past is that one of the reasons why I am in this, talking to you guys now today, and why I'm working within MICI to begin with, is that I kind of want to see that there's always a change around the corner coming, and that's how I would position myself if I was in a market and competitive intelligence manager position, for example. And during good times, it's kind of bad to be the devil's advocate, that now things are going smoothly, so you are prepared in addition to trying to find more of the opportunities, but you need to be ready for the bad times, ready for the nasty surprises that may take place, whenever. And then in the bad times, I would call this now one of the bad times. Now it's our chance to look for the opportunities, the way out, and the ways that we can tackle the issues that we are facing. And that kind of relates to I borrowed my current colleague, Dr. Tuomo Kuosa's picture of the epoch change cycle, because it's really kind of, it describes the mindset, how I feel about the things, and how I see the world is that the change is not constant, like the old saying said, but it is kind of having these phases when there's some big revolution that changes the world, and there's the phase for reassembly, and then yet again comes the pressure for change, and then the cycle kind of starts all over again. So it's a bit small font, but I can share the link to this. There's an article Dr. Kuosa has written about this, and it's very interesting and eye-opening, and it's timely now that we are in a certain phase of the epoch, and kind of you can look backwards and see how things have been developing. But the point here is that whatever phase we live in, it always feels very special for us, but there's always the change around the corner. Sooner or later it's coming, and not going into too many details, but the current epoch, as the researchers see, is that the current epoch we live in right now started with the fall of Berlin Wall and collapse of Soviet Union, and then we went forward, and the beginning of 21st century, which is actually when I started working with MICI, it has been characterized as one of the happiest times ever in some sources, even though there's been like dot-com burst and 9/11 and the wars afterwards. But still, it went so far that Russia became NATO partner, and we see that China is happy acting as the workshop for the Western countries, and everything is smooth, and there will be no war in Europe, and now we are where we are. And I would like everybody to see that the next revolution, according to this model, is right ahead of us. So let's be prepared for that. So.
And that's the question, Petteri. How can you be prepared? I think many in the audience can relate that life is just pure nightmare to nightmare. So if we start with COVID, first comes COVID and everything freezes down. And then after COVID, or even during the COVID, started the new crisis, which was the logistic crisis, as well as the China shutting down, and there was the no supply of many goods, which caused inflation, of course, in that sense. Already in the logistic, there was problems in the Ningbo Harbor, Los Angeles Harbor, Suez Canal, and so on, impacting things. And this inflation then, that we could maybe argue that started as part of the COVID, didn't make it much better. The inflation that was almost zero, at least in Sweden, now it's there somewhere in 10%. And as a consequence, the Fed and the European Central Bank and local banks, the central banks in different countries, they have been increasing interest rates, hitting mortgages, hitting consumption, hitting company loans, hitting everything. In addition to this, there is this Russia's war in Ukraine that caused, of course, problems for the energy prices and gas prices, and you name it. Now when China is waking up again, there is manufacturing taking up, and it needs, surprise, surprise, some raw materials such as copper, and the copper price has gone through the roof. So it feels that from COVID to energy crisis, to logistic crisis, to war in Ukraine, to inflation, interest rates, the copper, it feels like going from one nightmare that never stops going on. And the question is, what is the next nightmare? And how to prepare for that?
Well, turning on the headlights, if you use the kind of metaphor of driving in the dark with your car. So there is a need to streamline, there is cost pressure, but it's really important for businesses to maintain a strong focus on their monitoring of the market, so the overall competitive landscape, and do whatever it takes so that anyone can deny the importance of your MICI operation and shut you down. If you understand what you have, what's your focus, what are the topics that you are following, and what are your resources, and what are the tools that you are using, then you can choose what to neglect, what to leave out, focus on how to find the next opportunity. And during bad times, I like to think about the fact that we should find the ways to find the new opportunities. General is enough. It's not enough just to generally monitor everything. You need to understand where to focus. If you have adequate tools that may help you kind of bring structure into really overfluttered information that you can have with the general focus. But then you need to be able to bring the structure. You need to be able to let the end users personalize, because the top management, for instance, they don't have time to just read long newsletters that you just dump into their faces. You need to be able to personalize and deliver exactly the actionable information and intelligence that the decision makers use.
So that's the kind of challenge. You need to monitor lots of things, but at the same time, you don't want to frustrate and vomit over information to your stakeholders. Dear audience,
And
you are welcome. Yes, Petteri?
Yeah, and the other side is that you need to invest time and money into doing this while there is the really strong cost pressure. That's also kind of the other challenge, making it really difficult. I do feel bad for all of the MICI professionals, but then again, there is this opportunity to show the organization, show the decision makers that you know what you are doing, and we have intelligence people working in the intelligence community, so I have no doubts that once they start working, they can do it.
So that's actually the best moment to shine and to show to top management that you're adding value. Dear audience, Malika just put their point to the chat. You can see down towards bar, there is one red number 1. So you are also welcome to contribute with questions. We will take the questions in the end. But if you have comments and ideas, please feel free to share them there. And speaking about that, maybe we could move to the next slide, please. And here we go. So if we think then that how do you choose what to monitor? If we think about these black swan moments that maybe you are monitoring apples, but you should actually be watching for pineapples as well. So that if you then have decided that you cannot monitor everything in the world, you have to choose and focus, like you said, Petteri. How do you choose that? Which are the minimum areas you should at least cover?
That's a very, very good question, a very difficult question. I think I need to revert back to my previous answer, that trying to find the new areas, new solution opportunities that you may have. So kind of when you drop something, it opens you the opportunity to use your efforts and time and money to something else that you are not doing at the moment. I guess the map illustrates the fact that if there's an area, Ukraine is shut down, find something else. If it's China, that's proving to be difficult for you, find something else. And that kind of I wouldn't necessarily call it the luxury, but that's still, it's a luxury for business information people like us. We get to kind of dream, and we get to think about outside the scope. We also have people working in companies that need to focus on the right now and fixing things, and we can bring them information, and we can bring them suggestions to verify. We can try to find the insights that would strengthen a view that we actually need to go into this market, or we can replace that supplier with suppliers in that area, or we can focus more on certain process or certain function or certain way of doing things.
And that's very actionable insights then, that if your payroll is blocked in Silicon Valley Bank, or if your raw material suppliers in Russia are out of the question, or if you under contractors in Ukraine, unfortunately the factory has been bombed down with cruise missiles, where do you quickly find the alternative suppliers or solutions to get your employees paid, for instance, with this banking crisis? So then, if I understand you correctly, the market and competitive intelligence become the saviors of the galaxy.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, why not? That's a nice way to put it. So let's be that.
Excellent. And that actually leads us to our next slide. We are going a little bit fast here, so dear audience, feel free to point out questions and comments. But this is the thing, that if the crisis is here, regardless, is it the inflation, is it the lack of or challenge suppliers that you need supplier intelligence to track alternative routes, is it the banking relationships, for example, the market and competitive intelligence professionals, there is the saying that the crisis is what is the saying? It's something that never lose the crisis as it's a good opportunity. Something like this, I suppose you know. So, however, it's not so easy. So even though the market and competitive intelligence would be looking for these alternatives, to communicate this clearly is the key. So what would you think from your past experience as a market and competitive intelligence consultant in other companies? You must have witnessed some successes and failures. Without mentioning the company names, could you share us some very simple do's and don'ts? A little bit like the guidebook for the dummies, what definitely not to do, and what seems to work well when you are then trying to get your senior management to listen to these alternative insights.
Yeah, I guess the old man in me goes back to the early years of the 21st century, and back in the day when I started this in this profession, all of the internationally operating systematic intelligence operations, they were started through a careful planning, so process planning and intelligence needs analysis, and trying to understand where we want to take the company with the MI program that will be launched. And the best cases where I have personally been involved in have been the cases where there has actually, during the setup phase and the intelligence needs analysis, top management has been involved into the discussion. It's amazing what you can achieve when us as consultants together with the internal MI people got together with the top management, get FaceTime, even 1 hour to interview about their requirements, their needs, their pain points. And while you do that, you get very, very good insight on what you actually need to achieve with the MICI function, but you also get buy-in, and you could even, in some cases, you could create an evangelist for the MICI function among the top management of the company. So if I would be able to kind of go back to that time when these things were carefully planned, that would be the best medicine for this. I know that we don't have that luxury because we might be talking about an ongoing intelligence function that was started by just taking these resources and let's start delivering these through SharePoint or some RSS feeds to the decision makers and so on. But I still, with the risk of repeating myself and alienating the audience, you should really find out where you are at the moment and assess the situation. There is time, even though there's crises and we are busy, there's time to kind of take the helicopter view and understand what is the scope, what are the resources, what are the tools, and what you should actually do with the intelligence function. Then you actually make kind of enlightened decisions, what to drop, what to focus on, and you may be able to find the new opportunities. You may be able to get the FaceTime in the management. Just, go outside the management team room and refuse to leave if they don't hear what you have to say and present your stuff.
So creating that urgency and trust and commitment there by bringing relevance. You also are old enough that you went through the 2008 crisis. That was the big Lehman Brothers crisis. Many people don't even remember anymore that episode. So do you have any juicy quotes from that time that you remember, some crisis situations and how those were handled, even if they were not handled ideally, learning from the worst?
I don't know. I didn't feel it as strongly. As strongly as today, like COVID plus the Ukrainian war. So I guess the COVID was such an extraordinary event that it kind of made it really, really different. I think even the 2008 collapse was such a thing that it didn't change the feeling that we are in a happy place, like I was referring to the epoch turning. So it was part of the reassembling, and it was a big crisis and companies went down. I'm not saying that at all, but it wasn't, perhaps at least among my customers, it wasn't regarded as threatening as the current events have been kind of identified. Not correct way to put it, but it was only the kind of the financial side. You were still able to direct the business to new areas, and you were kind of in a survival mode in a sense that it wasn't as strongly felt.
Maybe
or
it was
then golden memories. It's so long ago that I just feel like it nowadays. That's also a possibility.
Maybe it was relatively short shock compared to these 3 years of COVID and this escalated energy crisis and inflation and the war in Ukraine. But you were earlier, a few slides earlier, we were also discussing about some practical things to do. And I think you mentioned something that can be done to sources, because if the top management only wants to hear about what to cut, is there something that can be done on the source area?
Well, at least small adjustment can be easily made if you either yourself or with outside help take a look at your source portfolio, because at least in larger companies, it's very typical to find several ongoing subscriptions for same sources, or they may be reports purchased independently by different business units, whereas you could actually buy only one report and share that within your tool, for example. So I think that's quite tangible. It may not be like 6 figures instantly saved in your budget, but that's definitely one way to look at things, is to look at what you acquire, what you buy, and why not even discuss if you are using a software tool, ask competition what kind of things that the more modern version of competing solution might offer you, and that way save big euros or dollars in licenses. That's definitely worth checking. And as a reference point, you don't need to hire a consultant necessarily. I'm, for example, happy to help if somebody asks, but you don't need to do that. There's lots of reference help available in like industry associations, and there's literature, and there's research, and all kinds of things that the MI manager can, the one who is aspiring to be more efficient and understand where the money is going and get some more bang for buck, like they say.
And actually, you are quite right. In the big companies, it's very normal that they have several tools. They have media monitoring, they have maybe some social media monitoring in marketing, they might have in investment relations some monitoring. Even the boards of the companies might use consultants. So in different layers in company, it's what we say in Swedish, torta på torta, like a double trouble. It's quite common that they have several different tools, which also then could be maybe streamlined and optimized in that sense, that moving some of the sources and tools while keeping others, or looking at a tool that is more comprehensive, then can actually be funded with that while still cutting costs.
And one thing is to be really honest with yourself, that take a look at the usage, for example, of your software. Do the users actually use? Do they subscribe to how they use the system? And draw some conclusions and fix what you can fix. Because in the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how much we as MICI practitioners, what we do and buy and store and deliver. If it's not used by the decision makers, if it's not actionable in the sense that it actually makes the company move forward or do certain things and decisions, then it's done for nothing, and then it's okay to cut that.
And it's quite brutal also, if no one is reading your newsletter, if the management is not picking up, if no one is commenting, if no one is asking for information, it tells kind of your place in the value chain. And this is the ultimate last minute call to make it or break it, increase your importance in the value chain inside the company.
Absolutely.
Very good. Now we maybe could open up for the questions for the audience. Malika, is there anything that you could maybe
we have one question from the audience here. What does businesses use to streamline and save costs during tough times?
Yeah, I guess the most common method is that management tells that we need to cut 30% out of this and that budget, and then it has to be done. And I guess the advice in that type of general challenges is that if you know what you spend your money in MICI operation, then you can make kind of a wise decision where you brush off that, let's say 30% or 10 or 20, whatever it might be. So it's very important for the practitioner to understand what they can afford, at least for the time being, get rid of, and what is very critical and makes them paralyzed if they lose something. So that's why, again, repeating myself for the 100th time, that the kind of the assessment and needs analysis, what are we doing actually, what should we be servicing, that is of quite importance.
So actually, to be very open and direct here, using consultant like Petteri Veronen, our ambassador here, you could make an intelligence audit, and the cost of this audit is most likely significantly less than the savings that it can provide by optimizing and retargeting your focus. You have been doing this kind of audits in the past, Petteri. How have they been received?
Very well. I think I was referring to back in the day, it was usually the kind of these type of process projects were larger ones, kind of full-fledged intelligence process consulting projects. But then at some point, mid 21st century, in the early years, it really changed. At least the market in Finland and Europe that I was mainly working at that time really changed, and it was the intelligence audit was like 1 day or 2 day type of projects. They were really popular, and they kind of, I think the companies, they wanted to save, they didn't want to spend too much time and money in a larger initiative, but they really wanted to start in a way that they understand what they are building for. And then it was very easy to take one of the hosted or SaaS solutions, the tool, and it was actually tailored based on the findings in the audit project. So I think that's a very good method, and there are ways to do it very quick and easily.
Are there any other methods that Maleka was referring to than just slicing and dicing? Like in Nordics, we have this thing called juustohöylä, that you are slicing the cheese slicer. That sometimes you might, the expression is to throw the baby away with the bathwater. That you destroy even the good ideas when you are just cost cutting 30% here and there. Are there any other best practices that you would recommend instead of that?
Yeah, I guess the only intelligent way to do it is to really be able to understand what I, as a MI manager, what I can remove without jeopardizing my whole operation. So that's probably the only way to do it in a meaningful way. And I think the other way, instead of just slicing something like fixed amount of the budget, the other way it tends to happen is that if there is some like subscription is ending now and you need to go and ask your management for renewed budget for this year, it's easy for them to say no, because now it's discontinued. Let's save it. Let's not resubscribe. Or it might be that one of your team members decides to leave the company. You need to hire a new one in order to be able to produce the high value add intelligence content, and you don't get permission because we need to save. So typically, at least my personal experience is that it's either something fixed, being forced upon you, or it may be that you lose kind of something just due to simple subscription ending or what have you, and you don't get new resources, and it makes your life very difficult.
And in order to know what to choose, the audit can help, and people can of course do the audit themselves, or they can get external help from the people like Petteri who have done this 1,000 times.
If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, and hope to see you again soon.